Not at all. Well, I am Jeanette Graff, and I am the Department of Medicine's Clinical Trials Office Program Manager. And I have been with MCW for 21 years, and I am going to go over the investigator-initiated trial components. And then Robin will do the second half, and she'll do her introductions when I hand it over to her. So, okay, so the frequently asked question that I receive from PIs, learners, and staff really is about the decision of when to close an IIT and or why to leave one open. So there are a lot of advantages in closing a study and understanding when it's okay to close one and the outcome of doing so. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions for you and give you some outlines of parameters to follow in making those decisions. One of those outlines would be that you want to make sure that the primary and secondary objectives are met for your project, for the IIT. Oftentimes, obviously, this is going to come from the physician, the primary investigator, or the learner. We'll be able to answer these questions for you. Another one is to make sure that all of your data is entered into the database. So the completion of your data collection. And does the data draw meaningful conclusions? Is there an outcome that answers the questions of what was asked in the protocol of why are you doing this study? Understanding that once a trial is closed with the IRB, there can be some additional activities, and then there are some activities that absolutely have to stop when the study is closed. So with this point here, once you close a study, it's understanding that you can no longer enroll new patients. Okay, I think everybody understands that concept. And you cannot collect any more new data. That sometimes is a question that the PIs get hung up on. Also is often why they want to keep the trial open. You also can no longer modify the protocol, so no more submissions for amendments. And any other further investigations cannot continue, meaning if they did not get a meaningful conclusion with their data, they can't go back and ask another question to adjust the data to answer another question. That information is what it is. And then you can no longer access or any of the participant data. You can't go into Epic. You can't collect anything more than what you've already collected. And then again, you can't use data for new findings or outcomes. So again, you can't submit amendments to change your protocol questions or to include a new finding. It is what it is, and that's the last that you can enter or modify any of your data. You can, however, still publish using the collected data. Ooh, let me hit the button again. You can still publish using the collected data that you have. Can't manipulate the data any further, but you can publish on it. You can still access your analyzed data. So you can interpret it, continuing to interpret it and analyze it once you have it collected. But you cannot just, you cannot access the participant data to retrieve more information or to do any queries. There is that exception if the project's not federally funded or not regulated by the FDA. So there are some little caveats to that. And again, that's something that the PI would know. And oftentimes, coordinators are helping with the regulatory components of these studies. So it's good for you to have this information as well, or to be able to relay it to the PI. So it is good clinical practice to perform an audit on your IITs before closing them. So that includes looking through all your regulatory documentation, your participant engagement, and data collection, just making sure everything is complete and accurate, both in paper and electronic forms. You want to, again, making sure that your objectives are met by ensuring all the data is collected, the regulatory documentation is complete, your patient engagement is complete, no more recruitment, screening, or data collection. Your eBridge submissions are approved and closed. You have no pending amendments or CPRs that are due. If your project requires entry into clinicaltrials.gov, that is updated and if it's applicable. And then you can then submit your final reports in eBridge. And once that's done and you have your final approval of closeout from the IRB, then you can archive your project, however your division or departments, your institutional guidelines or protocols. So fun fact that if you're not sure about clinicaltrials.gov, or if your project needs to be placed into clinicaltrials.gov, or even know anything about that, CTSI has a great opportunity to attend one of their educational seminars or programs on that. So highly recommend it. And also for your long-term storage, if you're not sure if your project can or should be entered into Florence for your electronic filing, some projects qualify, some don't. If you have questions about that or not sure about Florence, then there's also a training session on that. And also fun fact that there is a recorded training session on IITs and how to manage those, start those, and what entails in running and managing an IIT. So those are 3 opportunities that you can participate and engage in through the CTSI program on on your website. There's different links. Any questions, you can reach out to Sarah. She can hook you up with all of those. So for us in Department of Medicine, we have a closeout worksheet checklist, so to speak. This is the checklist Sarah was referring to that will be in box or is already in box for you guys. And for us, the worksheet starts off as a closeout, providing a closeout summary. So this information we can share with the PI. We can hand them the checklist or the learner, the fellow, whoever is assisting the PI oftentimes in these IITs. And they can kind of take this worksheet and work through as much as they can independently before coming back to the coordinator. But this closeout summary does include for us, the topic, the purpose of the document, the audience and users for the document, and then just details of what to expect, right? And so you might want to consider developing your own, utilizing the one we have and modifying it, whatever works for you. But our checklist does include, a list. It's front and back. I think it's 2 pages or 3 pages. And it's a checkoff list. What's applicable? Obviously, they work through, and it does have, you're able to list out who the owner is, the date the task was completed, and then any comments. For example, for line item here, line item 3, this particular project, if they used RedCap, then they had questions about RedCap, and we're, closing that out, or the access to it, or anything of that nature. There's a contact person for CTSI for the RedCap, and they can just link right over to that individual. So the closeout list for us is a partnership. So we work with it in tandem with the PI or the fellow learner, whomever is closing the project out, to making sure that they're stay compliant. They have a clear understanding of, yes, they can close the project, or perhaps a recommendation to keep it open. There are a lot of PIs that do have databases that they keep open for, forever, because they're collecting data and it goes from one learner to another as they rotate in for their, educational purposes. So there are advantages in keeping projects open. But again, we in the Department of Medicine ran an IRB report of all of our open projects for the entire department, and the number of IHEs that were open that we subsequently were able to close were quite significant. So that's how we ended up coming up with this checklist and being able to provide some clarity on when it is okay to close the study and what can still be accessed and done even after a project has been closed. So that's what I have for you. I will move it over to.
Wait, I do have one question.
Okay.
I just saw it pop up in the chat. You had mentioned the recording of an IIT study presentation. Where is that located?
So that is in on the CTSI website for the coordinators enrichment series. So what we're doing today, the enrichment series.
Oh, you were talking about today's session?
No, there's one in there.
Oh,
and
yes,
Sean
yes,
has
yes.
done-
My apologies.
I think October of last year.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. To answer that question, yeah, you can find all of our past session recordings on the CTSI website under the enrichment series if you scroll down to the bottom, and they should all be up there by title and date. Thank you. I was thinking it was someone else.
Robin, I'm a research coordinator in the Department of Neurosurgery, specifically in the Center for Neurotrauma Research. Been with MCW for almost 13 years, focusing on traumatic brain injury studies. Some of the stuff I'll cover will kind of be similar to what Jeanette talked about, but I'll be talking about, like it says, kind of more the nitty-gritty type of details. We also realized in our department that we had a lot of open studies that were kind of just sitting there. And so been reaching out to the PIs to be like, hey, what are we doing with these studies? Are they still active? Are we closing them? And then also thinking about the physical storage space that we have going on, which I'll touch on because we have new studies coming on, but we have no room to put these new studies because we have all these other older studies just sitting around. So Jeanette focused on investigator-initiated studies. Kind of the nicer thing about closing an industry study is that your CRA, your monitor, will be handling most of the duties and will kind of be telling you what should be done, such as completing the DOA log, waiting from them to receive authorization to do drug product destruction, closing out the TMF and how to store that. But then they will also help to work to make sure that your investigator is aware of all contractual reporting obligations that they have to do. One of the tips that I found in my search for this presentation was to check your clinical trial agreement, see if there's any specifications in there about what needs to be done when closing your study. So in the box for today's presentation is the checklist that I created for our department. Again, you can tailor it to what works for your department. But it goes through some of these items too. But a main part, like Jeanette talked about when closing your study, is making sure that all your CRFs and data are completed and entered, queries are resolved. If it's an industry-sponsored study, the investigator might have to sign off or certify all the pages in the electronic database. You might have unused CRFs that need to be destroyed. And then like we talked about long-term storage plans. So MCW's IRB recommends a minimum of 10 years of keeping study records. I looked into what the NIH had, and if you had a specific data management and sharing plan written up with them, you should have your long-term storage plan written into that. For FDA regulated research, work with your sponsor on what their policies are for long-term storage. So I've been digging through the CFRs a lot, trying to find if there's specific regulations for closing a research study, and there's really not much. But there are specific CFRs related to IRB records. And so that said that investigators must maintain research records for 3 years beyond the completion or termination of a study. But again, MCW says 10 years. So pretty much just like keeping everything for a really long time. But there's different options that you can keep those. We talked about physical storage, like in a warehouse, or if there's Florence options, which I might touch on a little bit later, I'm not sure. So you also have to then think about your investigational products or devices, any biological samples or supplies that you'll need to do the drug accountability for those items. And then you have the options of doing destruction or return. So make sure with destruction that you're following your local site's policies on biological waste disposal. For example, I have a research study where we use cartridges. So we have to remove the cartridges from the pouch when we're done with them and dispose of those cartridges in the biohazard waste. But then the pouch that it comes in, we can dispose of in regular recycling because they're plastic. or then working with the sponsor to return those supplies to them if they can be returned. There's other then supplies you have to take into consideration. For example, one of my coworkers just put out a bunch of blood collection kits for free for other studies to use if they want, because she can't reuse them and her sponsor doesn't want to take them back. So those are items that you have to think about when closing your study.
Donate to the TRU.
Yes, or you can donate it to the True. Yes. So other things to think about is the IRB and the budget. Jeanette talked about the IRB steps that you would need to take, but also remembering to notify any reliance teams if you had a reliance agreement. And then for those of us who aren't at MCW, just remembering to submit your final report in whatever electronic IRB system that you have. The other reason that made me think about doing this presentation was things related to budget and invoices. I've gotten invoices from Oak Rick, our site's hospital group partner. I never know how to explain what Oak Rick is. I've gotten invoices from them and I'm like, that study was closed years ago. So that was kind of one of the things that prompted me to be like, we need to have a system in place for closing out studies so that we don't get invoices several years later. So working with whoever your budget specialist is to make sure that there's no outstanding invoices, make sure that all your subject stipends have been paid, you know, if they're done with all their follow-up visits. And ensuring that the investigator is aware of all contractual reporting obligations that have to be fulfilled.
Question on the invoices. If your IRB is closed and you get invoice, can you pay that or no, you cannot?
You possibly could, even if the IRB is closed, you might still have an open like project account that you could pay from. So that is possible. But for some of my studies that we've gotten, like we get a lump sum of funding money. And if that money's been used up and now the funding proposal is closed, if we an invoice, I have no way to pay it.
Mhm.
Jen Brown said, make sure to collect any sponsor withholdings. Don't leave money on the table. So in the checklist that you'll see in box, I have a list of all the departments that I could think of who I would need to notify mostly when I'm done with enrolling. You know, you might be able to keep your study open in eBridge so that you can continue doing data analyses, but these are more of types of departments you want to close to let them know that you're not actively enrolling. There shouldn't be any more invoices coming through. Like, for example, the invoices that I got from Oak Rick were for physical therapy sessions with a patient. And I was like, this subject ended their involvement in my research study years ago. You know, there shouldn't be any invoices coming through for things like that. So here, this is where I explained what Oak Rick is. So administrative approval to conduct research in the hospital, whatever department you have at your site that's similar to Oak Rick, you would want to let them know. Whoever your funding source is, for example, like maybe the Advancing the Healthy Wisconsin Endowment, letting them know that you're done to enrollment. The Grants and Contracts Office. If you do government research, OHARO, letting them know. Closing out the study in Encore, which I'm not as familiar with Encores, maybe some other people are. I'm not sure if you close it out before you close out the IRB or if they need to be done in tandem. If you have an RSH open in Epic for your study, closing that out. Any biosafety review committee. So if you have an IBC application in eBridge, making sure to close that one out as well. And closing things out with the investigational pharmacy, letting them know that you're done to enrollment. And getting rid of any products that you have with them. I also I enroll from the emergency department in the ICU. So I also like to let them know when I'm done with my study, letting their department leads know that the study is no longer taking place, that we won't be coming to their floors to enroll subjects anymore. If you use the MRI services for outpatient MRIs, letting them know that your study is done, and that way they can take their protocol off of their machines and clean up room.
closing out any payment systems that you might use, such as Greenfire or Avara. And a big one for us here at our site is like letting the TRU know that you're done to enrollment, that you're not going to be bringing in any more subjects to do follow-up visits. That way they can close out all their paperwork on their end. And then like we talked about, electronic data capture systems such as RedCap or Zelta. If it's an industry sponsored study, your sponsor's probably going to be taking care of that. But if you're doing something with an investigator, you might need to close that out on your own side. So, like I said, my checklist is in there, but you can tailor it to your department. So list out all the departments that you utilize for your lab. Do they need to be notified of closure? You know, some you might not even need to notify them, so you don't have to list it. But then keeping track of when you did notify them. And if they issued back any kind of like official letter saying, yep, this study is now closed in our eyes, and saving that with your closeout documents. So I just wanted to share, since I was combing through all the Code of Federal Regulations and I was just searching for the word close or closure. Did you know that there are Code of Federal Regulations for fishery closures? There are just federal regulations for everything. I just thought that that was wild. So if you're interested, you can click on the link and take a look at it. It's great. I do want to go back to
Did you touch on ct.gov?
Jeanette did.
Oh,
What was that? So I've recently been looking into a lot of for the long-term storage for our lab because we have a very full storage room full of subject folders that we just don't know what to do with. I'll go back to the last slide in a minute where we'll be giving another presentation on it, but the two options that I found are either sending to an offsite warehouse, boxing up all the folders and sending it to an offsite warehouse, or scanning the documents in and putting them into Florence. So those are the two options that our lab is looking at, but there's lots of different considerations you need to take into account, about who funded the study and, what are the rules for that. So just keep all that in mind when you're thinking about closing a study and what you're going to do with physical paper forms. If your study is still open, I recommend writing up a plan now of what your plan is and putting that into your IRB system so that you can just have that ready to go. For studies that are like we have some studies that are already closed with the IRB, already closed with the funding source, and the subject folders are just sitting in our storage room. So we kind of have to come up now with a plan for what we do about that. But we're having a lab meeting on Monday that we'll be talking about that. So then I did want to share that on the 20th of May, we will be having more presentations about how to close out a research study. We have two presenters coming to talk about what they do at their sites and their best practices for closing out a research study. And then we will also have someone presenting from VRC, which is the long-term storage warehouse, one of them that you can use to store your subject folders long-term. They'll be presenting about their services that they provide. I did do that pretty fast. Any questions?
Jen has her hand raised.
Yeah, Jen Brown.
Hey, Jen.
Hi, thanks, ladies. This is great. I just wanted to throw out there if anybody has questions about using Florence for long-term storage, I'm happy to meet and answer your questions. I just chatted with Robin the other day, and I have a meeting with the IRB on Monday, how we can better align our Florence SOP with the IRB SOPs regarding document storage. So happy to discuss. Feel free to reach out.
I dropped the box link again in the chat. I did also want to just quickly mention, I'm so happy to see we have we have over 80 folks on the line. We do track attendance for grant reporting purposes. So if you didn't register, I would greatly appreciate it if you could register via the link in the chat.
And if you are attending this presentation as an ACRP Wisconsin chapter member or just an ACRP member, remember to log this in your credits on your account. Remember, you just manually log your attendance now. You don't go in and do the course evaluation like we used to do. You just go in and self-enter your credits.
And these sessions are always open to all of our partners, non-affiliated institutions. So we're happy to have you, and there's some future sessions on there as well if you want to sign up for those.
I'm curious, how different is the study closeout procedures or the checklist between, say, children's versus rated?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with children's or done any studies with them, so.
Is there anyone on the call who's from children's and can talk to this? I mean, I would suspect most of it is pretty much similar. Maybe the actual processes are different, but the buckets are probably the same.
I would think so.
The pharmacy on
Okay.
children's side versus
Yeah,
adult
A
side.
closeout is a
No.
closeout. It's just
Corporate
sticking with the.
compliance
yeah,
versus Oak-Ridge.
Right. Following the regs.
Mhm.
Yeah, the other thing I was gonna say at the beginning, and I didn't, is that I feel like there's always all these resources on how to start a study, how to start enrolling subjects, how to create the case report forms, you know, there's all these resources on getting started, but then when it's actually done and you've already collected all your data and you're done enrolling subjects, it's like, how do we do?
And to your point, when we create budgets, we have that line item of study startup cost.
Yes.
Yeah.
We always say that as non-refundable and, doesn't matter if we enroll 0 subjects or not. I think we should start adding a study closeout cost as well.
We do.
You do?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't done a budget
Well,
in years.
you're right.
Mhm.
Yeah, the study, the budget needs to include study closeout and long-term storage. And so the long-term storage is,
Yeah.
0 to 10 years, that's this much. And if it's more than 10 years, then it's this much, because sometimes sponsor, wants you to keep it forever.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, those regulations are pretty weird.
yeah.
Safety.
I was gonna say, hi, I'm Nyla. I was gonna say that sometimes some budgets they call it the IRB closeout fees, so they kind of have that versus just a closeout fee. So I don't know if maybe in your budget they have that.
They have the IRB closeout. Sometimes it will differentiate between those line items, but really what you focus on is the long-term storage line item in the budget. So the closeout costs include the administrative work and doing it, right? But you do want a line item that calls it out specifically, long-term storage. If you're gonna be having to box anything up and pay for storage, you'll want that compensated in advance. You want that paid for in advance. You don't want to go looking for them in 10 years saying, here's an invoice, right?
Or can you charge for staff time? Like the concern that we have in our lab right now is if some of our PIs do want to do the Florence option, we need staff time of someone to sit there and physically scan in every single item that's in the subject folder. So that's
Yeah, I
something
think
to
you're gonna
figure
be
out.
on your own on that one.
I know.
I have a question about close out post activities. 'Cause this question came up to me for one of our studies. So we have IRB closeout, or closure, I should say, and the study people want to send out a newsletter to participants, just kind of discussing about follow-up information or study results. So I know that private consent, we do say we can provide study results or follow-up information once the study is over. So how do I go about that because we already have IRB closure, how do I go about that where if we were to send a newsletter to our participants about study, like post-study information, I was kind of reading that I would still need to possibly open up the study and then have that approved, or could I still have the study closed and still send out this letter? How would I go about this?
I personally, I think it depends on the content of what's in the newsletter. And so I would ask for a copy of that and run it past your IRB. Because ultimately they are the ones that are going to make that decision. And it really just depends on what is in that information.
Okay. And is it possible that they'll request for me to reopen the study? Or it just depends on, like you said,
Yeah.
what is the content?
In my experience, once the study's closed, it's closed. You can't reopen it. And so it's my experience. It's an all or nothing. The IRB will either say, yes, it's fine. They can go ahead and send it out, or they will say, no, it's not. And we can't do anything about it. It's closed.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then somebody in the chat mentioned at UW-Madison, you would need to reopen the IRB application and the disclosure results letter as new information.
Yeah, I meant to say submit the disclosure letter as new information. I've had to do that, coming from experience here. So at Madison, at least, we never close the IRB application until after the primary manuscript has been published. And we've confirmed with the sponsor whether we're going to be disclosing results to participants, because that was a headache to do.
Right.
Yeah, so I do recommend, like I talked about these checklist items, of closing things. I do recommend keeping your IRB application open way longer than all these other items. This is more like, my items are more like things that you can do as soon as you're done with enrollments and follow-ups. But I do recommend keeping your IRB application open for quite a bit longer, like Julia said, after lots of publications have gone out.
You could probably realign some of these bullet points to items to do when enrollment is done,
Yeah.
items to do when all study procedures are done,
Mhm.
then items to do when actually the study as a whole is done.
Right.
And you could probably have a little
Yes. Good idea.
reclassification. The same things, but
But I've had studies where industry sponsors are very eager to have that final IRB letter of closeout.
Hmm.
And I always, keep that letter, keep the IRB open until I know I've received all payments from sponsor. Because once you're closed with the IRB, they really are, depending on how the contract is written, they may not be under any legal obligation to pay you anymore once the IRB has closed the project.
Yes.
So you do want to make sure all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed before that closing of the IRB.
What about unblinding, which probably goes along the same lines as a letter?
Mhm. Same thing.
Usually the study is closed. So we, in the past, we have not gone into patient record other than just you can pull up their address to mail them out, the unblinding for industry.
It really, that would need to, I would think, be submitted to the IRB.
It should be.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it should be included in the initial submission that's the long-term plan, right? Is that they're gonna release the unblinded information. And so it should be in the protocol. That's not usually something they decided at the end of the study. It's usually part of the protocol planning is that they'll release the information.
And you will need the IRB open.
Yeah.
for it. So you cannot contact individual patients.
You're like, let's take that back to work with me. Any other questions or thoughts? Shared stories, shared experiences?
We like shared experiences.
When Cassie says, when we report contact hours Do we report as audio conference or chapter meeting or session or webinar? This might be for
Yeah.
you.
That's an ACRP question. I don't know. I just always pick a random one. I suppose I'd probably put webinar when I go in to report this on my credits. Yeah, they have a lot of categories. I don't know why they have so many categories to choose from. But no one's gonna be really picky about what you put.
Is 1 hour one credit?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these sessions are always an hour. I know the presentation ended sooner today, but this one is for 1 hour.
I would be nervous to retest too, Cassie.
Julie says, thank you both so much. Very informative, and thanks for sharing your closeout checklists too. You're welcome. Any other questions or thoughts? Thanks, everyone. Nothing else in the chat.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.